Hi, and welcome to the podcast. And today I'm with a really good friend of mine, longtime friend, Norman Nakanishi. Norman pastors a very significant church in Hawaii, Honolulu to all of you, although that's not quite the name of the community that he's in. But we've known each other since I first moved to Hawaii. He was really young. His hair is almost as gray as mine now. And he's leading a movement. They're doing stuff that's shaking the world up. So why don't you just kind of introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about the church. Go ahead and give us some numbers because I want people to have a context here. And then you tell your story about how we got hooked up when you were still a kid.
Well, I'm Norman Nakanishi. I pastor a church in Pearl City, Hawaii, on the rim of Pearl Harbor. I have in the virtual background here palm trees because I knew that Ralph Moore planted Hope Chapel on Oahu. His first service was actually with 72 people around palm trees. And I began to read about Ralph and began to be really passionate about what is this thing called church planting, and that because I see it in the book of Acts. And so our church started in a bank lobby with about 4 people, essentially. And I was part of a larger church serving a great man. And so
they wanted you to take over that church, right?
They sure did. It was an honor to be asked. Sam and Nancy Webb were the pastors of it. And but something in me after 10 months didn't sit right, nor my wife. And along the way, I met this guy named Ralph Moore. I met you, Ralph, and we were having just a casual conversation. You said something that you never meant to become anything. I would find out later. And you said, well, what do you think you're doing here? What do you think? What do you think you're still here? And the Lord used that to tell me that's why you don't have you're feeling the unrest. As much as it's an honor to take over this church, it was a church of about 800. You're supposed to plant a new church, and I didn't know of anyone else doing that except Ralph, you, honestly, and you had done it for years. And so I began to read everything you wrote. I don't know if I ever told you that. Listen to, remember cassette tapes?
Oh yeah. Somebody sent me 2 boxes. I got about 100 pounds of cassette tapes in my garage, and I don't know if there's anything I can even do with them. They may be all rotted for all I know. They just came in the mail.
I still have them right over here on my shelf.
Wow. Do they still play?
Well, I don't have a cassette player, but I'll bet you.
That's the problem.
I have your stuff. It's right here. And I'm saying you need to get that converted because that stuff's as gold and as real and applicable today as it was back then. Yeah. So your books are the primer for training my planters, anyway, the guys that will come out of our church. And we're in 5 locations now. 1 church, 5 locations. And the numbers are, there's probably about 3,500 people that came weekly. We planted some churches, not a lot, but the goal is we start them as sites, and then we turn them into campuses where essentially as churches, the last thing is just a legal move, and you move them from a campus into a church. That's our goal. And we want to keep doing that. So we go from site to campus to church, site to campus to church, and then we've started online.
I want to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
Exponential, which I'm a part of, uses this 5 levels. And I see the multi-site thing as level 3.5 because they're not really reproducing, but you are. You are. So you're discipling, and then you're sending them out as a site, and then they become a campus. And then they become a church.
That's the goal, right?
So that's the big church with all the power and all the people and all the money that go along with that, using it to really expand the kingdom of God. And now we're looking at level 4, level 5, rather than a level 3 or camped out at level 3.5, feeling really good about ourselves. Yeah. This is wonderful. This is really good.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ralph, we've had this conversation, and I remember when you were pastoring, you said, doggone it, we can't seem to stay above the 2,000 level. And then you planted hundreds of churches. And I told you, Ralph, I said, Ralph, I'd trade places with you in a moment. I'd trade places to be a medium-sized church, but having a legacy of multiplied churches and church leaders than to have a big church. So we want to plant as many churches as possible in this next season. And so just identifying leaders, discipling leaders, and all of those things, because having a big church does not impress me. And I frankly am not impressed with the mega church attractional movement, unless, as we look at, say, perhaps Ephesus in the book of Acts, or the mega church plants churches.
Yeah.
Just think that's history. Yeah. And this is not a praise Ralph moment, but Ralph, without you in my life, in the life of the people that are in my leadership sphere, Pearlside would not exist. Pearlside Church on the rim of Pearl Harbor would not exist. And so, thank you. But your books and your cassette tapes, right over here, cassette tapes, are more relevant today, especially coming out of COVID or being in it. I mean, that becomes the script for moving forward. I think the new normal, that's an overused term, the next normal, the next level normal is supposed to be that, which is pretty much returning to the pattern of the book of Acts.
Yeah, we were talking earlier, you and I, about we couldn't have had Acts 1:8 ever really happen if there wasn't Acts 8:1. And we're kind of living through an Acts 8:1 moment.
That's so well put right there. I'm going to preach that. That's really good. So Ralph, the friendship that began, I began to hear Ralph more at a Foursquare conference. I was invited as a guest, brought some of our people. The year was 1989, and then 1990, and then of course we were considering being part of Foursquare back then. We went a different direction, and then you told me, no, I'm glad you did, because it was more about the kingdom of God than just a denomination, so best thing that we ever did. But from that, we kept a relationship now that's gone, 1991 was when we first started kind of hanging out a little bit, 92. So that would be almost 30 years.
Yeah. We're old guys.
Good night. And like wine, let me tell you, some of these resources, sorry, the virtual background's got it. But, some of these resources, let me just get this off here. Some of these resources right there. Okay, but if you read them in order for me, you do that, you read that to get the backdrop. You get this to get the methodology. I think these three books are critical, but Let Go of the Ring is the story that will inspire. And so potentially church planners, they have to read those books. Okay, I encourage them, but they have to Let Go of the Ring, because let go of the ring is the thing that gets into your spirit. Because, you have to let go, right, Ralph?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for pastors to let go?
I don't know. It's I think it sneaks up on you. You start having mortgage debt and all kinds of things, and it becomes really hard to. And then sometimes there's just a selfish motive. If there's enough people going to my church, the legacy publishers are going to want to publish my books. I'm in the process just this week. I'm working with a big tech church in Texas that about 4,500 people, and they're pivoting toward church multiplication. And we're using Let Go of the Ring as the text. And so we've been meeting together for a few months, and they've got 6 planters on deck all at once. And we never did more than like about a church and a half a year was our rate of climb. Anyway, so I turned Let Go of the Ring into there's a student edition now that will be coming out, and it's got helps for the leader to guide you through it. I took all the pictures out of it so it could sell a little cheaper on Amazon. But yeah, I'm beginning in my old age to realize that I need to gather some of this stuff together, and then maybe do some video, some audio, put some of the stuff that you heard when you were young, and put it out there again. I don't know if I can rescue it off the cassette tapes. It'd be interesting to hear what that guy Ralph Moore had to say 30 years ago. That would be it might be scary to listen to that. I don't know. But yeah,
I don't know. I kind of look at the exponential movement uh, just as a validation to what you taught. It's kind of like you were exponential before exponential. And so it's really good to see that partnership right now of you working together.
you know, it's amazing to me. Todd Wilson was a nuclear engineer, uh, building ships for the Navy. Left I mean, a lot of money in that way. As soon as he left the Navy, they tried to recruit him for the Army and the Air Force, and a civilian job, so it paid really well. And he worked in church for a while, and then Exponential kind of pulled together with a couple hundred people. It was a near defunct church planting organization that didn't plant churches, and then Todd came along. And that's only been 10, 11 years ago. And at that time, 4% of churches in America had ever reproduced one time, including church splits. And a lot of them were church splits. And they've moved the needle now to 7%. And that's almost double. And most of that's intentional planting. And so to me, it's such a privilege to be involved with Exponential. And, you know, at this time of my life, I thought I was going to be sitting home watching TV and probably still living in Hawaii. And I've already done everything there is to do 4 times in my life, and I don't surf anymore. So it was just such a blessing to be a part of Exponential and a validation, because I was kind of the poster child for one denomination. I won't name them, but I'm doing a lot of stuff with that denomination today. Okay? All new leadership. And I fit in really great with their top level leadership. This was 20 years ago. I was their poster child for church planting, and they were starting to plant churches. They'd get Robert Logan in, they'd have me in, but they'd have me in a lot. And I spoke at their full-on conventions. And then I took a shot at seeker-driven church and where it was taking us in America. And this was in the mid-1990s. And that was the last that I was ever invited to anything those people did until they started coming to Exponential. And now we're doing stuff together all the time. It's just really great relationship and some really wonderful people. But, you know, we were so privileged coming to Hawaii. We were scared. You know, we thought we'd rented a place to meet, and they pulled the rug out from under us while our goods were on the boat. And we got there and had to start in the park, and it was illegal, and the cop was there, and it was crazy. But what happened, somehow we got to be the match that touched off a lot of little fires. And it's not just, for sure not us, New Hopes, the Calvary's a little bit, but there's so many small independent churches or little clusters, networks of churches in Hawaii. And I've just always felt that it's like, why me, Lord? How did I get in this? And it's just pretty fun ride. I was in a micro church the other night with some guys in Hawaii. Some of the guys that were with us from the very beginning. Actually, some of the people who moved from California to Hawaii. Aaron Suzuki was there, and it was such I mean, my wife was crying. It was really a touching thing. But you know, just looking back on those days when we first pinned the map of Oahu, well, actually the whole state, we put a yellow pin in a map wherever there was a golden arches. If there was a McDonald's, then the town needed Hope Chapel. And when the Hope Chapel got planted, we would put a green pin in. And we actually pinned the map completely. Wherever there was a McDonald's, including Waikiki, we managed to get a Hope Chapel in there. But then everybody else got in the act, and whatever happened was at least 10 times the size of whatever we were overall. So yeah, it's been a really good thing. Let's talk a little bit about your perspective on the church at large with COVID as a pivot point. Not so much COVID itself or even how we're reacting, you know, the technology, all that stuff. Everybody's pretty full of that. But just where you think the Lord is at work and the Holy Spirit is driving us to do something we haven't done well.
I think the church gathered, especially in the West, needs to turn into the church scattered. In other words, rather than trying to get into one big place, we need to be in many smaller places. And that means recruiting, finding new leaders, training new leaders, empowering new leaders, releasing new leaders, because you can only have churches if you have leaders. And so, but I think, like what your books point out, there has to be an inherent philosophy, a deep value, and a belief that this is who you are and what you need to do. And then when God gives the growth, I think he'll give the growth because of that. But the test is letting go of those leaders so we can grow in many places. So coming out of COVID, Ralph, coming out of this, I think the Lord's saying, this is your Acts chapter 8, verse 1 moment. It's time to scatter and be in many places. And I think if you study history, the awakenings, gosh, they made preachers and teachers out of everybody. Churches were everywhere in the frontiers, in the cities and communities. Lay preachers were multiplied everywhere. It was equipping on the go. I think that's where the Lord's trying to take us post-COVID. And the question is, will we as American megachurch pastors or megachurch pastors, period, will we answer the call of faith to let go of the ring, to use that phrase, because that's really what it is. That book, Ralph, marked my life. When I read that, I said, this has got to be the journey.
Yeah, it's one interesting thing, and I kind of always tend to look at things from a little different angle than everybody else, but I've noticed a lot of churches are showing growth, but what I don't think they really realize is if there's any disciple making going on, then it's not just the Sunday morning show, it's the Zoom calls during the week.
Yes.
Are all those guys that are now leading those Zoom groups who weren't leading anything before going to want to go back to waving people into a parking space in the parking lot and calling that their ministry? I mean, somebody's got to still do that, but once you led a micro church during COVID, are you going to really want to go back and just be a spectator and throw money in the bucket? That's not going to happen, I think.
No. One of the things we did, right now anyway, we have 5 locations, but each location has its own online campus, so to speak. And what it's done, it's galvanized the people rather than watching the central video cast, a central stream. We said, look, let's put all of our different pastors and their teams from worship to speaking and everything else. And it's created an upswelling of identity. And I'm at the age, I'm 9 years or 10 years younger than you are, Ralph, which I'm still old by today's standards.
You're a kid.
I am passionate about trying to find as many young leaders as we can and getting them on the field and letting them discover who God's called them to be, which means, it's going to be messy. Let the beauty of organic, on the ground, relational discipleship and leadership happen. I'm committed to that. I've been over doing the mega thing. Like my greatest joy is going to some of our smaller locations and speaking there and connecting, finding, boy, these are potential new leaders and disciples. Doing the big thing, I find that I feel more like a CEO.
Yeah.
Doing the smaller thing, I feel like I'm doing the Jesus thing and the Paul thing. And maybe, I don't know if it's because I'm older, but when I passed by McDonald's, I remember that, Subway, all those studies that we used to talk about. And when I pass McDonald's, I still think about the fact that's where you would meet with your church planters regularly to equip, to coach. And that's still what you do in fabric and in principle, right? I mean,
I can't go to McDonald's now or Starbucks. But we're doing it online. I'm doing more of it now than I ever was, and I'm doing it around the world. It's pretty exciting. We were talking earlier. In the last month, I've done stuff in Finland, Bangladesh, New Zealand, and England. It's just and all over the U.S. And I don't have to get on an airplane to do it. It's really nice.
It might be an effort now to actually get on an airplane and go someplace.
Yeah,
you think?
I mean, until there's vaccine in my body, I'm probably not going to get on anybody's airplane. So, Norman, as we're winding this thing down, just any last words, anything that you'd be saying to young guys that are out there that are, struggling, trying to figure out what to do next?
Go back to the Bible, go back to Scripture, especially read through the Gospels, but then really absorb the book of Acts, because I think that gives us the pattern about what Jesus calls us to do, and that's simply make disciples. He builds his church, but the one thing that he's called us to do is to make disciples. And I think you look at the example of Jesus and Paul, they did it organically, they did it relationally, they used interpersonal relationships, small group communities, and it's supposed to be simple. I just want to say, keep it simple. Keep it simple. So much of social media is about the big and the crowd and the pizzazz, and I can't square that with the Bible story. I just really can't. I look at New Testament Christianity. It was messy. It was relational. It was organic. It was supernatural. We see the miraculous. Believe for the miracles. Believe for the supernatural, but as an adjunct to relational discipleship. Live a life that's steeped in prayer and the Word. Don't let those fundamentals ever escape the walk before the Lord. But also constantly look for leaders in the generation below you and behind you and intentionally lean into them. Developing discipleship relationships earlier. Empower them. Let them have their time of serving, of discipling, of leading. Take chances, take risk. Because when I look at how Paul, what Jesus had with the 12, what was the plan B, man? And then what a motley crew of mixture of people. And the same thing with Paul. Gosh, I think that's it. Keep it simple, keep it organic, keep it relational, take risks, really value the small over the big.
Yeah.
Really
good. Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking time to do this. To me, you're one of my sons in the faith, and I'm so proud of what you have done and where you've gone and all your guys.
Hey, Ralph, it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, it's an honor to have you. We just need to hang out. I can't wait to get back to Hawaii.
Hey, well, listen, we had it on our docket to have you talking shop like this in person, so we'll plan on that.
Okay, take care.